Power of Shape is USISPF's newest podcast series where we showcase the brilliance of women professionals across an eclectic mix of industry and amplify the voices of inspiring women in leadership, riveting dialogues, and candid conversations to uncover her story. We intend to go beyond the boardroom and perhaps to the virtual drawing room where we can have intimate, heartfelt conversation focused on getting to know the person beyond the persona. My guest today is the inimitable Genie Sugene Gan. Thank you, CEO of First Intelligence. So, Genie, it's been a minute. We last spoke in the BC era, before COVID era. So now it's past that. So time does fly. Um, Genie, I wanted to ask, like, you look at someone like you. You've worn so many hats: lawyer, entrepreneur, a public policy servant, a technology leader, and you mentioned in every phase of your life offered something different. What were some of the lessons you learned from each of these? These are very different, but also similar. There's overlaps, but they also are very distinct and the distinct phases of your life. So, what are the lessons you've taken from these? Both the good and the bad.
The lessons I see all the lessons to be good. Because I think even if the experiences were bad, it's really how you would turn it around to make it positive. I think it's all the different phases of my life have just sort of converged, I feel. And convergence is all thanks to the people that I've met along the way, um, good and bad ones. And so we've learned what to do to become a good leader and what not to do in order to be that same good leader. So I think we learn from everyone and the different learn from everyone in the different phases of my life. Um, by learning what to do and what not to do. So I think there is that convergence. In terms of work experiences, obviously each of these phases of my life offer a different set of experience. Um, whether it's in the private sector or public sector, or somewhere in between, the perspectives are always different, right? So when I was working in government, obviously you are standing for a set of country position, right? So when you're negotiating with other countries, in those G2G interactions or G2B interactions, especially because I had to deal with private sector people and stakeholders as well, the lens is very different, and the positions that you stand for is also very different. Obviously, from the other side, as private sector, working with, I've done a lot of B2G as well, apart from B2B, and also B2C. So it's the perspective is different, and you sort of are your constituents are different, right? So, but by and large, I think the values that stick with me have remained. It's always for a wider cause. It's always for a greater good. It's always trying to do something better, more efficiently, something more meaningful every day. So I think, regardless of the chapters in my life, I would say, the values that drive me have remained, and therefore the outcomes are pretty much all still fairly positive.
Yeah, no, that's amazing about the values because I think that's a very intrinsic, intangible aspect of what we're trying to bring on this podcast, trying to understand more of the values. And I wanted to ask you that in the context of, we're talking more and more about emerging markets, about getting more girls into STEM education, more women in technology. And I remember you and I a few
Mm,
years ago spoke about the stark disparity that existed
mm.
in major tech universities as well. So speaking of the values, how do we break this gender gap, like sort of break this sort of these glass ceilings that exist and perhaps have more parity? I know it's a very egalitarian world and it doesn't exist, but
Yeah.
we still have to do our best to move the needle to get to utopia, even though utopia itself is very bit of a myth.
Interesting you put it across that way, because there is actually a related. So you see, on the one hand, a large part of the world is talking about equality, inclusiveness, equal access to opportunities, and all that. But on the other part of the world, where we, at least from my vantage point, we are talking about how it should not be tokenism, right? So I have gotten um, offers to sit in boards, right? Large organizations. And the ones that I would turn down without even lifting an eyelid would be those who come and tell me that, we need a woman on board to sort of just check off that ESG box, right? So that, it promotes the standing of the organization to say that we have a, somewhat younger woman profile in our board, sitting in our board, to help boost their board composition. Now, to me, that is tokenism, right? But of course, it's a first world problem because most parts of the world, people are still struggling with that equal access to opportunities for women and girls. And so I think you've rightly pointed out that it is, well, we don't live in an ideal world, so there will always be imperfections, and we have to live with those imperfections. So for me, I have the opportunity, and I think I see it as a privilege of seeing things from different lenses, depending on the country that I travel to or that I work with. And I'm really blessed to have had be able to have been able to work in a global role. And so in my role, actually, I've been able to see and interact with women and girls, and of course men, in the tech industry, in government, and in other sectors as well, in the critical information infrastructure sectors, um, across so many different regions around the world, the western to the eastern to somewhere in the Middle East as well. So I think every country's response to this gender issue has been different, and there is also a difference between what governments try to achieve and try to communicate through programs as well that our campaigns that they design, and how it has flowed down to the community and how people have responded to it and how they have benefited through these programs as well. A lot of times there is some political will in trying to promote gender diversity and inclusiveness. And then how long it takes to come down through that ripple effect to the wider community is a question, is a $1 million question, right? A lot of times we don't see it happen yet because in the STEM industry, I would say the average in terms of women and girls participation is about 1 in 5
Mm.
today, globally. And so that's not enough because we're talking about, say, about 20%. And if we want to move into very specific subsectors, right? Um, if we're talking about AI development, I just attended a conference last week, and the keynote speaker was telling us that it's a single percentage point in terms of participation by women. So we're not really getting the hardcore tech women and girls participating yet. The magic question is, of course, how do we do that? Right.
Mm.
It's not an easy question to answer. It has to be a combination of government, well, political will and government action, um, support from the industry as well. And of course, individuals have to get the act together and have that motivation as well. And of course, the community is important. It plays a part. How women support girls, women support one another, and allow that mentorship and that, people who have been there and done that should be able to support those who are aspiring to get there. And of course, men play a part as well in this whole equation, definitely, being the other half of the entire population demographics that we're talking about. It's important that men also come forward and be more supportive, which they have been by and large. But there are still some elements of society that needs working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your point, Jeannie, touches on about the role of male allies because you can't just expect it to,
Yeah,
it's a problem for affecting women that only women can solve it because that's fundamentally great economic books like Why Nations Fail about institutional barriers and men in
yeah.
power from government to society and the highest echelons of private sector have always sort of, there have been these barriers for that reason too. For women to kind of break those glass ceilings, they need powerful male allies. And that's what we're trying to do on this podcast as well. And you touch on a few important issues that I want to get on because you also talk about societies to progress. And one of the things that every economist will point out is for societies to achieve that and be a developed society and to achieve that high economic growth. You can't do it without getting more women in the workforce, without getting more girl children educated, without getting more women in tech, especially if tech is driving critical edge of societies. So
Yes.
for countries sometimes miss the forest for the trees by thinking we'll just focus on private sector growth but leave out what they see as sociological issues or other societal issues. But these are all very intertwined and interlinked in a larger economic play of forces of nature.
A lot of times what people don't see is that having women and girls in the workforce, in the development of technology, actually creates better products, right? And to create better products that actually make sense for people in general, right? Because if you have got, let's say, applications developers who are only men,
Hmm.
who don't understand the behavioral analytics or rather the user behavior of among the women population. And you're trying to develop this app for a company that does FMCG, right? Fast moving consumer goods. Then what you're essentially doing is you're making an app that may not speak to the good half of the population, potentially your buyers. It's just a very sort of basic, simple illustration I'm trying to make here. So having more inclusive workforce with more women in the workforce, actually, in across all spectrums of the workforce, um, actually can bear fruit in terms of creating more commercial value for businesses, right? And of course, if we were to take this even further, and I love talking about this, we should be also not just talking about women in the workforce, but also women in leadership, right? So if we're talking about 1 in 5 women in the STEM industry, STEM sector, then if we're talking about women in leadership position within the STEM sector, it will be even less, right? Because you really literally have a much smaller stock of women and girls in the sector to choose from to allow them to be groomed to rise up to leadership positions. So it's worrying. Um, it's I think there is a disparity in terms of there's this dichotomy between the speed of development in some regions and some countries as opposed to the rest as well. So not only are we seeing across the board um, uh, still a lot of inequality in terms of access to opportunities and having participation of all genders across the board, we're also seeing um, unequal rate of improvement in achieving equality. So some regions, some countries are actually um, seeing more improvement than the rest. So actually, there is there are that I mean, it's inequality at all levels.
As we kind of continue this conversation, we'll kind of pick on some of those pearls of wisdom to try and get to that parity a lot more. And I wanted to bring it back to your own personal journey. And the beautiful thing is we've had on this podcast, and because of government affairs, we've had a lot of amazing lawyers on this podcast. One of our guests actually called herself an accidental lawyer. I'm curious, what was your calling to the legal profession? Did it call out to you? Was it something you always saw yourself doing from as a 6 year old, as an 8 year old, or was it something like, the safe route to go through to join the corporate world? Or how was that journey?
I started drafting contracts for my older brother to sign
Mm.
since I was 8 years old.
Wow.
So like, and because he's much older than I am, so he was like already a teenager, right? So by the time I was 8 years old,
So I was right, it
and
started at
so
eight.
I started at 8. I started early, so it's like when he promised me something, and I wanted him to make sure. I wanted to make sure that he would deliver on his promise. I would actually draft a contract. Obviously, I was a kid, and obviously, it was, I would draft, I so and so hereby promise, Genie, whatever, and do this. So I think I've always had an inclination um, to deciphering between right and wrong, um, black or white, um, and this position, that position. I sort of had an inkling uh, on these things since a very young age. So by the age of 8, I started drafting contracts for my family members. Um, Promise me things and to make sure that they don't renegade on their promises. And by 10, I knew I wanted to study law. So it was always something that I grew up with, and it was like a goal that I wanted to achieve. And I'm glad I stuck to it, and I did that because I think my legal training had helped me a lot in terms of my thought processes, in terms of discernment, in the usual course of things in life. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, someone once spoke about the changes lawyers go through, especially at tech firms, whether the in house counsel and you were government relations for a major cybersecurity firm. So, in your experience, like, did you see yourself more as a technology leader or a legal expert, or perhaps a bit of both?
I actually see myself as a business person who happens to have operated very well in the tech sector, um, applying her legal knowledge and other things, right? So I'm not tech trained, but I'm legally trained. I'm also finance trained, also counseling psychology trained. And so, and I've got government experience. I had worked in the private sector before. I came from a big four law firm. I was in one of the big four big accounting firms as well, working in corporate finance and audit. Um, you know, so to me, I think my identity is in some of it and not exactly with one aspect because the different aspects of my experiences and training in school and all that really just um, sort of hones my skills in different ways. And when I put it all together, it just makes me a more effective professional. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but it's really difficult to just pinpoint on one particular aspect because I think it's the sum of it that I think
Yeah.
helps me bring value, yeah, to the organizations. Yeah,
On the contrary, I think you did because I don't think we don't operate in silos, and especially in this sector when there's a convergence of sectors and
yeah,
convergence of various forces.
mhm,
So we ourselves have to adapt. It's no longer back in the day where the cobbler just is a cobbler, the mechanic is a mechanic. We have to kind of
exactly.
multitask and do many
Yeah.
many things. There's a very interesting juxtaposition I want to ask you. As a cybersecurity leader, you've dealt with ransomware, threats, precaution, protection, and all the things to be cautious about because the world is full of nefarious state and non-state actors. But that in some ways seems juxtaposed by the Genie Gan that I've got to know, or the corporate leader you want to be open, welcoming, trusting of people. So in some ways, it's a very interesting Bruce Wayne and Batman dynamic, right? Where the cybersecurity leader Genie has to be, no, the world is a big bad place, some malware, and we have this how you protect your trust. But the Genie Gan as the leader is warm, affable, gregarious, open, and welcoming. So how when are you Bruce Wayne? When are you Batman?
It's it's about compartmentalizing, I feel. So it's just like, Akshobh, you are son to your mother, and you would be a brother to your sister, right? And then you would be a friend to me and a colleague to someone else, right?
Hmm.
I think it's about compartmentalizing. At the end, you're still Akshobh, right? Pretty
Yeah.
much you. Yeah, driven by the same set of values. So when I am wearing that hat, as cybersecurity leader, whatever you name you want to call me. Obviously, I wear my professional hat, right? I have to be no nonsense. I have to get the work done. I have to solve the problem. People only come to me when there's a problem, strangely enough. Um, I have to be a thought leader. I have to put out, I have to talk about trends. I have to preempt people. I have to talk about policies. I have to speak with the government, senior people, I have to even speak to the media and make sure that the messaging is right for all users and they can understand it, right? So I'm pretty good at laymanizing technical jargons into simple ways that people can understand so that they understand the gravity of the matter when it comes to cybersecurity and now, when I am a mentor or when I am, whether within the workplace or in the community where, I volunteer as a mentor in many different settings and speak with not just women and girls, but also, men and boys and people who are older than I am. So, or, people who may be reporting to me, but could be, older than me as well. So as far as I'm wearing the mentor hat, obviously, I have to be nurturing. I have to be a storyteller. I have to inspire. I have to be more personable so that they can, reach out and be able to learn and to be inspired and to craft out sort of a plan for themselves. There's no point that it's different when you deal with people. So I think it is all just me. And then when I am wearing some other hats, I would perhaps play a different role in different people's lives, and I think that's totally okay. It's still Genie.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeannie, I had to ask, because you uh, growing up in Singapore, and it's a city that I love to call home, even though I always say I never had a house there, but it was always home for me. It's a global city where you're exposed to multicultural background very early on. It's a very global, diverse city. Um, but even then, you always found new exposures to different cultural milieu, both in your time in government when you liaised with other governments and liaised with people of other nationalities, but also working for a global cybersecurity firm in Singapore and working across teams in different time zones. So there's a lot of learning, but there's also a lot of unlearning. So what are some of those coming in contact with new cultural working types, and perhaps help teach you some things, and perhaps also unlearn some of the I don't want to say stereotypes, but perhaps some of the notions we may have had of working with different communities across the globe. Because I feel like multiculturalism is such a powerful tool where we just discover new parts of ourselves while we learn about a new culture.
You're right. And it's also about keeping your mind open, I think. And it's about keeping your mind open and keeping a learning heart as well. So I think it goes together. For me, I have the privilege of sort of being exposed to the international, different cultures from a young age. And so it's helped actually in terms of not being too sort of boxing people up, boxing things up, boxing myself up in a sense. And to me, I've never really seen um, sort of people as very clearly defined within their boxes in that sense. So when I enter a conversation in a new country with a new person, I go in with a blank sheet of paper, right? And then I start writing out my experience, my observations about you as a person and my learnings and all that. So I think it's about keeping that mind open, and also I think keeping. And I always tell my mentees that that you need to have a learning heart, right? Because if you start to stereotype people, you close up your mind and you sort of shut out your ears as well, and listening, and you start being um, developing certain biases, and you have selective hearing, and you just put yourself out from opportunities to learn new things. So I think that adaptability is really important. It's a survival skill in today's world. Actually, if anyone is looking into having a regional or a global job, this is essential.
Couldn't agree more. And I wanted to think about another concept as well, about mentorship, because as we come along in our careers, it's kind of like the Blanche the Boy line: whoever you are, always dependent on the kindness of strangers. Because having a powerful mentor is always, just changes the way we think. It's a very Maya Angelou school of thought, right? We may forget what you did, but people never forget how they made you feel. Can you talk about some of the mentors you may had, or what a mentor may have said, especially at a time of adversity, that's helped you power through?
Remember one time, one of my mentors actually told me that, Jeannie, you can do as little as you want or as much as you like. Now, think about it for a moment. What does that make you think? It
Mhm.
means that the power to decide is in my hands,
Mhm.
right? And which means I determine what I get out of my experience. I can do as little as I want, take a salary, kick back, relax, just sort of surf through it. Or I can do as much as I want and create breakthroughs, bring people along with me, round up the people, work towards a new project and do something that's been never been done before, right? And have new breakthroughs, not just for myself, my team, but also for the organization, for the company. So I thought that was powerful a thought. It didn't tell me what to do, but it made me realize what kind of a thinking process I need to have to decide what kind of a person, a professional I want to become. So, I think that's a great life lesson. And that's something that has stuck with me that, in every situation, I can do as little as I, wish to, or as much as I want. And the choice is mine. And when I've made the choice, well, I live with the consequences.
Little as you like, as much as you want. That really is a good takeaway for a lot of people listening. And I wanted to ask you now, coming to a little bit about one of my favorite cities in the world, and one of my what I like to call
Yes.
my adopted home city of Singapore. It's already a smart city. It was among the first nations to implement the Smart Nation project, being a city state, and I remember covering it as a journalist. And it boosted national cybersecurity strategy. It's built a robust digital infrastructure. Um, you know, you as a leader in the tech sector and cybersecurity, how have you seen yourself as one of the key players in building Singapore's digital infrastructure and creating this mammoth technological fortress that Singapore is today?
Wouldn't dare think that I play an instrumental role in any of this. But I do play a part in all this, whether as whether I, you know, as a government, public sector official previously, when I had the honor actually and privilege to work on some of these policy issues and also in the shifting of the laws and policies that would guide frameworks for these industries. Or as a private sector person that I am today, sort of just being closer to community and to business and giving very constant actually and regular feedback government to policymakers um, who are helping to shape um, this ecosystem because I see myself as playing a role regardless of whatever position that I'm in, regardless of whatever hat I'm wearing for the moment. So even now in the private sector, I'm actually in the executive committee in the cybersecurity chapter in SG Tech, for instance, amongst many other things, of course. And sitting in the Singapore coordinating committee for cybersecurity, actually sort of a national committee as a member, and also in other capacities within the community as well. So in all of these, actually, I constantly um, provide feedback and partake in that sort of policy thinking process together with government agencies. And just right after this, I'm actually right after the recording of this podcast. Actually, I'm going to have a meeting um, with the cybersecurity agency as well to talk about some cyber and AI big the task force that I'm chairing actually for the industry. So I think there's always this there's always a lot happening, and it's about bringing value to the table regardless of whichever hat that you're wearing. Because I think we all need to be driven by a greater mission, so that we can be more mission driven and be more cost driven towards creating a safer ecosystem. for Singapore, of course. And for me, I also am governor and global ambassador for the Global Council for Responsible AI, amongst other things. So I think I don't just wear the Singapore hats or fly the Singapore flag. I'm actually very interested in continuing these conversations, which are crisscrossing um, globally as well. So it's important for us to not behave or think or operate in silo at country level, but to constantly have that regional, global interactions as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about my time in the newsroom in Singapore, 10 years ago, we had SG50. We had, elections then. We saw the demise of Singapore's founding father, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, bless his soul, wherever it is. And this year, we had elections again, 4G leadership. It's very hard being a soothsayer, but technology is all about predicting the future. So, Jeannie, I'm going to put you in the spot. What do the next 5, 10 years look like in the technology space, particularly in the Singapore space? Or what do you envision in the smart nation uh, ecosphere?
Hmm. Here in this part of the world, in Singapore, it's just going to get smarter in the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm,
Um, but my worry is, as it gets smarter, will it get safer?
mm.
Right? Not breaking, but just 2 days ago, I just 2 days before today, um, I literally met this lady in person who just got scammed 210,000 Singapore dollars. The
Wow.
70-year-old woman, yeah, 70-year-old woman, um, who had a phone call. She's a retired accountant. She's not uneducated.
Mm,
She was a professional, right? She got a phone call from a police officer, who told her that her bank account was, you know, potentially hacked into, and she needs to remove all the cash that's inside. She can leave about $1,000 inside, but she has to withdraw all of that amount um, and deposit into a safe place, safe account. Right? And she did. So she withdrew 210,000 Singapore dollars, 210,000 Singapore dollars worth of cash. And she's a small elderly lady. She said that there was so much cash she could barely carry the bag. But she followed the instructions of this police officer and she deposited the money elsewhere and she's completely lost that money. She was in tears. She didn't know what to do. She reported to the real police, but there's no guarantee that she can get it back. Um, but she literally just got scammed of her entire life savings meant for her retirement. And she has no means of working again to earn that money back. There's no way, right? So
yeah.
something supernatural has to has to happen for her to be restored of her money. But just really shows that we are living in a very sophisticated world and increasingly so. But the question that weighs on my mind constantly is, as we become more sophisticated, as we become smarter, are we becoming less safe as well in society,
Yeah.
right? I would say that in terms of cybercrime activity, Singapore is a hotspot. It's popular target for cyber threat actors
Of course.
because there's so much financial activities that's happening. There is so much money sitting in this country because of foreign investments and all that. Even if you were to just extract $100 from each user, it's a very dense city, right? You just multiply that by 7 million. I think you can do the sums, even if it's $1 per person, right? So it's attractive as a destination. It's also attractive as a hub to the rest of the region because Singapore itself is a hub in terms of trade, finances, and financials and all that to the rest of the region or to the rest of the world. So it's a lot of flow through here, and I think it's important to. And when you talk about cybersecurity, it's anything digital. Akshobh, you know this as well. That there is no border. Yeah, there is no
Yeah.
border. It's not like I can build a wall and keep enemies out, just keep cyber attackers out. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of work to be done. Um, Getting smarter, but also we should become safer and teach people how to protect themselves.
Yeah, data
A lot
crosses
of
border.
education, yeah, a
Yeah,
lot of educational efforts need to be in place as well.
absolutely. Well, data crosses border faster than people and planes. So there we go. And wow, that is, we're a smart
Yeah,
nation, but we constantly find ourselves dumbfounded in this, just to put it this way.
yeah,
Uh, culture goes a long way, as you said. And this is a question I've always been intrigued by as someone, immersed in Singapore and, fallen in love with Singapore and, in some ways, keep thinking about Singapore. We have a sense of kiasu, the fear of failure, for those who may not be familiar with Singapore Singlish or any of the more Hokkien lingo, if I'm not mistaken. And Asian societies, be it Korea, China, India, or Singapore, traditionally, or, in a very communal society, family serving, respect for elders, there's always that fear of failure. It's also, it's very redolent because we are taught to be more submissive, not to push the boundaries, be disciplined in school. Do you feel in this day of entrepreneurship, this may be a little more stifling, one that doesn't allow people to think out of the box? Because I know Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, critiqued this once back many years ago. I'm just curious, having seen the Western world and Singapore and Asia world, is there something we're missing here?
it's more an Asian thing because I think it's like Asia for beginners, right?
Hmm.
That's what I call Singapore. It's like Asia for beginners, sort
It
of like
is.
between the Western and the Eastern world. And but actually, when I started to work globally, realized that in many parts of Europe, actually, people also have that same mindset. And I think that aversion to failure stems back to the aversion to taking risks, right? The
Hmm.
reason people don't take risks is because they're afraid of failure. But if you don't take risks, um, that scope for success um, is rather limited. So I think it's about whether you want to be self-limiting or not. But again, there is no right or wrong. So just because somebody is willing to take more risks, that doesn't make him or her better than somebody else who prefers to play it safe. But I think it's just a personal preference, and in every society, I think there's a well, I think there would be a good mix of different types of people. But in general, I think two-thirds of this world are generally risk averse, which is why people would find ways to hedge against excessive losses and stuff like that. It's also important because while I'm an entrepreneur, a risk taker, and I've started, run, and sold off businesses in my life before, so I think I am a little less risk averse as compared to the the usual person you would find on the street. But at the same time, I'm also a lawyer. I'm an accountant. I will find ways to manage these risks. So at the end of the day, I think it's about finding a balance because we also need to calculate the risks, right? And find ways to hedge against it so that we can be more prepared for different kinds of scenarios. And that also is a sure way of ensuring success. So I think Um, I'm really trying not to give you on the one hand, on the other hand, a typical lawyer kind of response, Akshobh, but it really is important that we take a balanced approach to things as well, because like, I don't just mindlessly take risks because it's like doing bungee jumping without a rope,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if you were to do, well, I'm not sure if you've done a bungee jump before, and if you have, you always have a rope tied to your legs, right, your feet, so that there and there's a safety harness and stuff like that. So, I mean, you don't just jump off a cliff without a harness. I mean, so I think it's important to always have a balance. Yeah.
Yeah, I've done skydiving, so I know what it's like to take the plunge. And Harry Truman once said, "Give me a one-handed economist," because you started up on the other hand. On the other hand,
Yeah.
I want to ask you this. This will combines the legal aspect, the Singapore aspect, beautifully. I think I've always found this fascinating with lawyers, right? Like, we've seen so many founding leaders of many countries, especially Singapore. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was a lawyer, and I've always wondered, like, a lot of professions produce outstanding people, but what do you think is the secret sauce for lawyers that produces these policy perspective, these very sagacious thinkers, because you've seen engineers and mathematicians and doctors, also very brilliant people, but something about lawyers that helps them, and builds a foundation of great societies. And we saw that in the US with Adams and Jefferson and Hamilton, and with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew as well, build a nation state out of nothing. And we talk about forecasting for the future. No one could have foreseen what, perhaps maybe he could have foreseen, we don't know. And certainly not to the extent it have been when he passed in 2015, of what he had built. So what is it about lawyers, Jeannie?
It's maybe a sharp mind and a sharp tongue,
Mm,
which makes lawyers general. I'm really averse to stereotyping, but I think generally lawyers are, well, in law school we are all trained to have we're all trained in critical thinking.
mhm.
So it produces a sharp mind, which is able to sort of quickly make an assessment on what's right, what's wrong, what's arguable, what's not, what's a good case to make, and what's a gone case, right? You have to think on your feet all the time, so you have no choice but to have a sharp mind,
Right.
right? It's like if you keep going to the gym somehow, I'm sure you'll build some muscles, right?
Mm,
You have no choice. Um, and then also, as lawyers in law school, we are taught to articulate um, our thoughts, right? To convey, to make a case, to win a case, right?
mm,
Um, and so we are trained to sort of be able to speak more effectively. Um, for me, actually, I'm a fan of storytelling, which
mm.
is why I use a lot of, even in this conversation, you notice I use a lot of analogies.
Yep.
I tell
Same.
stories to illustrate a point. Yeah, so that's my method. And Mr. Kuan Yew himself was a great storyteller as well,
Mm.
right? And of course, he's charismatic. He has a sharp mind, and he definitely is extremely eloquent. And well, I think that's his way of drawing people in. So I think maybe that's my 2 cents worth of why lawyers may make good politicians.
Yeah. Jeannie, I want to ask you, because as a lawyer as well, as one other thing I've asked lawyers frequently is about IQ and EQ, the intelligent quotient, the emotional quotient. There's a left side of
Uh,
your brain that deals with very hard numbers, datas. There's a law as well. Yeah, but there's also EQ, which you had as a leader, about listening to your staff, listening to others, and even as a lawyer, trying to listen. You can advise a client, but you also want to hear how their feeling is, especially when you heard about this woman who lost 210,000. A firm data person would be like, "You're so stupid. How do you not know it's a scam?" But the emotional quotient be like, "Oh my God, she's vulnerable. Let me listen to how she's feeling." So, how do you balance IQ with EQ? Because good people are able to do both.
is there a fun fact? Um, and I like how you brought up the left brain and the right brain, right? So we have two sides of the brain
Hmm,
that are the right side actually deals with all the creative thinking, the people side of things, and the left brain is well, basically the logical thinking, right?
hmm,
Fact about the two sides of the brain is actually that they are both connected by this bridge of nerve fibers,
hmm,
which is called the corpus callosum.
hmm,
And this these it's like think about them as fiber optics, right, for communication. These nerve fibers actually allow both sides of the brain to communicate and coordinate their functions, right?
hmm,
Um, so So even while I'm using my right brain to speak to you, to counsel someone, to do an oil painting, to try to deliver a motivational speech, I am using my left brain as well, thanks to the nerve fibers. And if let's say I'm trying to solve a problem for a client, um, help you think of a solution for a problem statement. I am also using the right side of my brain to try and inject some creativity and all that as well.
hmm,
Or maybe to help you communicate that solution to your wider audience and how to do it more effectively. So
hmm,
it's difficult to, for me at least, I find it difficult to sort of define any one task to just being a purely left brain
hmm,
work or a purely right brain work. Um, it sort of goes together, right? And again, I'm going to bring in the analogy of working out your muscles in the gym. It's important to make sure that we use both of it, right? People are so logical to the point of shutting out all forms of creativity. I think it just takes practice. And
Mm.
some other people are completely artists, right? And sometimes you're like, did you just say that? There's no logic in what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So people are, in fact, you're right, more inclined one side or the other. But I think to be more holistic person. For me, I'm very customer centric. I'm very client centric because the lawyer, you know,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I have to be people centric. I have no choice, right? Because I'm helping you solve your problem. I'm not solving my own problem. I'll have my own ways to solve my problem, but I'm helping you. And if I were to, I have to make sure that I'm able to communicate well to you and come up with a solution that works for you. It's all about you. It's not about me.
Mm.
So I have no choice, and I had that upbringing of being able to train both sides of my brains fairly effectively, and I think that's actually an important practice cycle for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. On my penultimate question, Jeannie,
Yes.
you spoke about a mentorship, but I want to speak about mentees. A lot of young people today may
Mm,
seem rudderless because they don't get the right mentorship. It's intimidating
mhm.
approaching senior people. Not everyone's fortunate to have Genie Gan as a boss, right? So for those of them who don't, what advice would give to mentees, especially also for young women in the workforce, because it's a women podcast, how would you advise them to find their seat at the table, perhaps find a voice at a time when their voice are being drowned out?
It's important to find your support group.
Mm.
People who would believe in you and people who would give you that chance, right? For me, I have the opportunity of seeking out and having found people who believed in me and would give me that chance, who would place a bet on me.
Mm.
There are many of such people around, not just me, right? There are very many different other um, well established and sterling professionals out there whom I've seen believing in someone who's an underdog,
Mm.
believing in someone who may be awkward in a certain situation but has a brilliant mind and deserves a chance,
Mm.
right? Or believing in someone who is bright but severely lacking in communication and just stepping on all the wrong toes, but just bringing that person along and just mentoring that person and allowing that person a seat at the table. There are people who would have placed their bets on people and give that chance. So it's important to get out of your seat behind the screen, hide behind a keyboard. But you tend to find opportunities hiding behind a keyboard. Get out
Yeah,
there, right? Well over. I always tell people, young and old, just get out and meet people.
exactly.
It is convenient. Just yesterday, with a group of people, I'm running this task force. Some people were suggesting, why don't we do an online meeting with whichever government agencies? I'm like, but why do you want to do that when you have the opportunity? Everyone is in country. Why don't we take the opportunity to meet in person? The nuances, the body language, and all that. I mean, it's priceless. You can read the room much better when it's in person, right? So I think we have gotten so used to online that
Mm.
we forget that there is this massive opportunity out there by meeting in person. And always, Akshobh, if you are in country, I'll rather meet you over a coffee and
Of
have this
course.
chat rather than online, right? Or, so I think it's important for people to just get out there, meet people, seek people out, talk to people, and find that mentor that would believe in you and give you that one chance you need at any table that you want. And sometimes, I bring, my mentees to meetings, to events with me. Just introduce them, right? And I'm not the only one. I'm sure there are many people out there who do that for the mentees.
Mm.
So I think it's important to be more proactive and to not hide behind a keyboard anymore. COVID is well over. Forget it, right? There is no excuse for staying at home.
Absolutely. I mean, you can always read the room better than you can read the Zoom, as I like to say, because virtual world. Jeannie, on a final On a final note, I mean, this has been an exhilarating conversation, and you and I have still been derelict of not meeting in person. We've spoken over the years, but both of us, we got our tone to be in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
But on a final note, we spoke on mentees, but what are your words of advice for your peer and your contemporaries on perhaps trusting the next generation? Because we always have this thing of generation gap, right? That's why us with our parents, them with their parents, or you know the
Yeah.
phrase, not
Yeah.
back in my day, it wasn't like this because well, it's not your day
Yeah.
anymore because technology evolves, things change, times change.
Yes.
So perhaps with your peers and your contemporaries, to understand that if there's someone brilliant and smart younger than you, trust them more, delegate, you know.
Yes. Yes.
You'll always be remembered if you nurture and mentor. What are your words and advice for your peers and contemporaries on trusting the next generation?
I am a millennial,
Mm-hmm.
and so in the workforce we have welcome Gen Zs, right?
Mm. So, yeah.
And to Gen Z, very soon we're gonna be in a few years' time we'll be welcoming the Gen Alpha,
Yeah.
right? The post 2000 babies,
Mm.
post 2010 I
10
think
babies.
babies,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
who are 15 now, but give it another 5 years, we'll be starting to welcome them into the workforce. So I think, my word of advice to my peers and my counterparts, my fellow millennials or even older friends, would be that, don't ever forget how you started,
Mm-hmm.
right? And your bad day doesn't have to be somebody else's bad day.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I think a lot of people are like, oh, I went through tough times. I didn't have it easy, and you should also learn it the hard way.
Exactly.
But really, times have changed, yeah. Back in our days, we were dealing with first generation handphones, which were not smartphones, right? We saw that evolution to the smartphones that we are using today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Kids these days grew up with tablets and smartphones. They don't understand your world. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to keep up with times as well, to be a progressive leader. I
Mm-hmm.
always think it's important to be a progressive leader that's future looking and forward looking as well. So that's my one simple advice.
Well, Jeannie, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I am indebted for your time, for the pearls of wisdom, and there's so much more we can talk about, but perhaps on another day, another time, and maybe in person this time, when either
Yeah.
this side of the pond or I need to turn and come back to Singapore because it certainly
Yeah.
has been a minute. Thank you so much, Jeannie.
Yeah. Thank you, Akshobh.